My fellow muggles, the time has finally come. I don't think there's been a more highly anticipated game than Hogwarts Legacy for Harry Potter fans. The books and films were great, but the tie-in games were never able to match the magic created on the big screen. But things have changed a lot since 2001. Games are now bigger, better looking, and more complex than ever. But they're not always better if they're not done right. The buzz created with the preview of the 4 common rooms showed that fans were as eager as ever for a new title. But because Harry Potter's gaming legacy has never been great, let's be honest, and the state of modern AAA games leave much to be desired, Hogwarts Legacy sits in a precarious position. The hopes of fans worldwide weighed heavily on the shoulders at Avalanche Software, but equally heavy were their concerns. Well, for those wondering, I'm very pleased to report Hogwarts Legacy lives up to expectations in more ways than one. However, some issues beyond the technical shortcomings keep it from achieving the heights we know it can. But before we get into the review, here's where each house ranks in terms of player percentage after the first 2 weeks. We all know the Potterverse has more holes and inconsistencies than a slice of Swiss cheese, and it'll take nothing short of a miracle to fix them. But that won't stop fans from loving it, myself included. From the laughably bad security at financial institutions, to highly abusable potions, and the frankly arbitrary house points allocation. None of these matter because nostalgia is an incredibly strong emotion to tap into. Your first steps onto school grounds will be met with a heavy, mirror-fogging sigh of relief, followed by blooming excitement. With how massive and lively Hogwarts Castle is, it's hard not to be impressed by the scale of it all. Simply being able to freely explore the school, the entire school mind you, and Hogsmeade was amazing, letting you relive moments from the movies in a more interactive medium. Admirers will no doubt find many sections were nearly identical to the live film sets. As you walk down the castle corridors, you'll be greeted by students, ghosts, and an alarming number of strange-looking cats. The ornately decorated interiors were meticulously crafted with high-quality textures down to the very fibers in the wood. And it doesn't end there. The world was filled with small details that continually brought involuntary muscle contractions to my face. Classrooms were filled with books, desks, quills, and assets that never felt copy-pasted. Cauldrons bubbled, and ladles danced as you walked by the countless animated portraits of the notable witches and wizards that plastered the walls. But much like a McDonald's Big Mac, the shifting staircase is smaller than I remember it, but it's still cool nonetheless. You might even witness one of your fellow students on the unfortunate end of a howler.
If you put another toe out of line, we'll bring you straight home!
One thing that stuck with me was how dynamic the world felt. The animations were top-notch, and the developers added so many little extras that made this absolutely spellbinding. NPCs would respond to certain actions, and the student body grows and dwindles with a shifting day and night cycle. As impressive as it was during the day, the castle was just as stunning at night, with moody firelight illuminating the stone fortress. There's sadly no photo mode as of now, and it's unclear whether it'll be added later. This doesn't bother me since it's not a feature I use, but I know those who do will be disappointed. Performance, however, is a mixed bag, but has improved since launch. I was hopeful when I saw the shader compiler when booting up the game, but after playing for a while, I could only imagine how much worse it would have been without it. One positive is that I haven't had any crashes, but that's just my experience. I know others who have, so it just comes down to luck. Frame rates also take a nosedive for a second or two in certain areas as the game tries desperately to load in assets, which isn't uncommon in Unreal Engine 4 titles, but obviously still sucks. The game stutters even on high-end PCs, and while it does leave room for scalability with future hardware, a lot of it seemed preventable with better optimization. And not to mention, ray tracing absolutely hammers hardware. In addition, there may be the occasional bugs and glitches that require a hard reset, like when I fell through the world, or possibly even requiring reloading an older save point. But luckily, the autosave feature is pretty good, so you won't have to load too far back. Playing on high settings as opposed to ultra yields much better results, with a very minimal sacrifice in quality. So the performance in the here and now is very playable and actually enjoyable if you're willing to make a few compromises. The first thing you'll do is create your character, and the character customization is good with lots of options. But the game feels more at home in the 21st century with its contemporary hairstyles, speech patterns, and mannerisms than it would in the 1890s. For an even more personal touch, link your Wizarding World profile to your WB account to import your house and exact wand. As a newly admitted 5th year student, you'll have to work extra hard to catch up to your peers. Attend classes, learn how to cast new spells, and brew powerful potions. None of this is nearly as mundane as it sounds if you're a Harry Potter fan, as there's plenty of room for curiosity and mischief. Along the way, you'll meet a memorable cast of students and teachers, and discover your rare ability to see and harness ancient magic. However, your gift makes you a target amongst the criminals and revolutionaries of the Wizarding World. Contend with dark wizards and a goblin rebellion, all while keeping up with your studies and adventures. I quite like the main story, but the quests follow your typical linear progression, so it doesn't break any new barriers. But some of you may recognize the names mentioned in the books and films, which will fill out some of your favorite characters' family history, so there's plenty of lore in the game to unlock. It also paints Slytherin students in a more favorable and realistic light, rather than just being Gryffindor's punching bag. Some of the stuff shown in the trailer won't be available for at least a few hours, but the more you explore, more quests and activities will open up to you. I'd say around half of the side quests were enjoyable, and the game rarely resorts to giving you fetch and delivery quests. However, if you're looking for the best ones, all 3 companion questlines were phenomenal, so you should absolutely do those. The side activities in the castle were a great way to supplement your exploration as you spam Revelio to find all the enchanted parchment. You'll spend quite a bit of time in the castle, but eventually you'll want to go outside. The open world was surprisingly big, but fast travel points were well placed, so it never felt like a slog to travel. Simply walk near a Floo Flame to add a new fast travel point on your map. If you prefer a more scenic route, you can always hop on one of your flying mounts provided you've unlocked it. Controls specifically while flying were slightly clunky, splitting the camera controls between the 2 controller joysticks. It's usable, but it's just a bit odd. As you fly over, you'll notice that the world is littered with icons. The open world activities were pretty fun, at first, but eventually fell victim to the common pitfalls of open world game design, which is a long-winded way of saying they become repetitive. Scattered monster dens and dark wizard camps followed the same formula, so after you've done a few, you've pretty much done them all. And not to mention, outside of perhaps a handful of legitimate head-scratchers, once you've gotten the hang of the puzzles, they become very rudimentary. But there were some engaging activities whose fun factor was a bit more resilient. Fans of city builders can sink hours decorating the room of requirement and tending to magical beasts, scratching that Sim's itch. So overall, I have mostly positive things to say about side quests, but side activities were a mixed bag. Thankfully, most of these are optional, so the pacing of the story doesn't suffer. Managing to muster just enough willpower to avoid watching game previews, I could only hope that combat was fun, and much to my delight, it mostly delivers, and has a surprisingly good foundation. It uses a combo system with lenient timings, and a juggling mechanic that was great fun. Your attacks felt appropriately weighted, and once again the spellcasting animations are class leading. Color-coded shields require you to cast certain spells to break them, and switching between enemy targets was intuitive. Dodge attacks to avoid damage, or execute a perfectly timed parry to stupefy enemy spellslingers. No achievements are locked behind any of the 4 difficulties, so the game is quite accessible. However, there are 2 small things I want to address. First, enemy variety was adequate, but a few more would have been better. That being said, enemy design was great, trolls were formidable, and spiders were outright terrifying. Those with a severe case of arachnophobia may find some of these fights very tough to get through. Second, I didn't like how the game implemented the spell plates. Spells of the same color do not share a cooldown, so if you're extremely adept, you can rotate through your entire repertoire of incantations by utilizing every plate. and although it's never required for any fight, switching between spell plates is cumbersome. It's disappointing when games such as Assassin's Creed Odyssey can show that toggling between two sets of skills can be quite seamless. And piggybacking off that last point is a small nitpick. Navigating the in-game menus isn't terrible, but can be a little slow with the controller. Instead of having navigable tiles, the left analog stick acts as a cursor. At least that was how I felt playing on PC with the PS5's DualSense controller. But these are very minor complaints, so let's move on. Underneath the pretty facade is something that doesn't get enough credit, and while it doesn't do anything new, it stands in a class of a few. The great thing about the progression system is how good it feels and how well balanced it is. It doesn't place emphasis solely on quests and combat, but encourages a more well-rounded approach. You'll gain experience by doing just about anything, including those side activities I mentioned earlier. There are a dozen different types of collectibles and a handful of different puzzle archetypes, and progressing in each track will yield different rewards. Solving puzzles, completing assignments, and finding enchanted parchment will reward you with not only experience and new spells, but can also unlock essential upgrades such as expanded storage. So a lot of the time you're killing two birds with one stone. And despite their simplicity, they were fun and helped you get comfortable with learning new systems. By the time their novelty wears off, you'll likely have gained all you need. With the experience you've earned, spend talent points to augment your spells and consumables to make them even more potent. Just be careful when choosing talents because you cannot reset them, and there are more talents than points available. Next, you can also upgrade your gear and slot in various traits or perks to further enhance your combat potential. There's no shortage of gear to be found, and once you've owned a piece of gear, you can alter anything to create a unique look based on all the previous stuff you found. You start off as a very green and naive student, but over time develop into a very powerful witch or wizard in their own right. The cosmetic stuff is all optional, but unlocking them felt great because all of it was included with the game without any microtransactions, something that deserves praise in this day and age. Voice acting for the main character and notable supporting characters was generally really good, and I can't think of any of them sounding the same. However, the NPCs are very exaggerated, but I suppose that gives them a lot of character. Given the choice between this and something bland, I'd take this all day. The only request I have is please reduce the frequency in which Ignatia Wildsmith speaks. For those who don't know, she's the Flue Powder Lady. Even though we don't get John Williams' iconic Harry Potter score, the soundtrack does not disappoint. Subtle nods to the film's music do a good job at emulating its style, and some dramatic moments were made perfect by the music. I'd give the music a solid B. The biggest takeaway from Hogwarts Legacy is that we get a complete product without microtransactions, which is becoming increasingly rare these days. And the developers aren't even asking for the $70 that more and more games are priced at. Everything, and I mean everything, is unlockable in-game, and the progression is sublime. Sure, the game doesn't have Quidditch, but I'm not upset about that, and the performance issues are mostly under control on the PC side. As a love letter to the films, especially the first film, this feels like a fresh start for Harry Potter fans. We finally have a game that recaptures the magic that the movies created all those years ago. Hopefully this fairy tale beginning paves way for a potential sequel. The story wasn't deep, but it was enjoyable and had its darker and touching moments. I'd argue a handful of the side quests offered an even more compelling tale. The atmosphere absolutely blew me away, the castle especially. In my opinion, this will be the biggest contributing factor as to whether or not you'll enjoy it. If you're a Harry Potter fan, then this will almost single-handedly carry your experience from start to finish. However, underneath were well thought out combat mechanics and a balanced progression system. But apart from its visuals, the open world game design isn't bad, but it's not anything new either. The controls were pretty good for the most part, aside from a few small criticisms, but these complaints were pretty minor. They were more odd than annoying and didn't detract from my experience. Luckily, Hogwarts Legacy doesn't overstay its welcome. It clocks in at around 35 hours for those who want to play through the main story and some extras, but for those looking to hunt achievements can expect to double that time, which is fairly tame by today's standards. Hogwarts Legacy proudly carries the Harry Potter mantle. The development team did a fantastic job, and you could see the amount of love and passion that was poured into it. I enjoyed it from the first minute till the closing curtains. I think you already know where I stand with this game. Hogwarts Legacy is brilliant.